You hear it before you see it, the low groan of timber straining against an endless sea. The ship drifts like a carcass, its sails torn and hanging in shreds, the wind carrying the stench of salt, sweat, and something far fouler, blood that has soaked deep into the planks. Below deck, the air is heavy, suffocating. Torches sputter in the damp darkness, their smoke mixing with the sour reek of rotting flesh. You can barely breathe as you step closer. Shapes move in the shadows, men, soldiers once proud, now reduced to broken bodies sprawled across the floor. Their skin burns with fever, their wounds festering with flies, their whispers thick with delirium. One clutches at your sleeve with trembling fingers, his eyes wide, unseeing, as if begging you to drag him back from the edge of death. And yet, he is one of the lucky ones. Because survival here does not mean rescue. Survival means something worse. Listen closely. Above, boots thunder across the deck. Voices, sharp, urgent, plodding. The wounded below will not be spared. They are burdens. They are mouths to feed. They are evidence to be erased. In this suffocating hold, surrounded by the dying, you feel it, survival has been twisted into a curse. For these men, abandoned by the empire they served, there will be no honor, no healing, no return. Only betrayal. Only terror. Only blood. But what came next was even more disturbing. You imagine what brought these men here, what drew them across oceans into the belly of this drifting coffin. It began, as it always does, with a promise. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, spoke of Batavia in shimmering tones. To young men from the villages and cities of Europe, it was painted as a place of endless opportunity. Streets lined with silver, markets bursting with spices worth more than gold, and the possibility of returning home not as peasants or beggars, but as conquerors of fortune. Recruiters whispered of honor, of adventure, of serving under banners that carried the empire's reach to the edge of the known world. You can picture them, farmers' sons, restless apprentices, desperate men who had nothing but hunger in their bellies and fire in their hearts. They signed their names with trembling hands, sealing a contract with an empire that promised riches in exchange for loyalty. They believed they would come back transformed. They believed glory was waiting on the far shore. But the ocean had its own lessons to teach. The voyage to Batavia was not a grand adventure, it was a crucible. Weeks turned into months as the ship clawed its way through violent storms and endless, suffocating calm. You can hear the creak of the hull, the endless slosh of bilge water rising in the dark. Food rotted before it could be eaten, the air grew thick with sickness. Dysentery, scurvy, fevers, the ocean carved its toll into every man's body. The young soldiers who once spoke of honor now staggered on deck, their gums bleeding, their skin waxy and yellow. At night, the hold was alive with coughing, groans, and the scratching of rats feasting on crumbs that men fought over like wild dogs. Some whispered prayers, others muttered curses. Already, some of those who dreamed of fortune were reduced to corpses tossed into the sea, their bodies swallowed without ceremony, their names forgotten before the sails carried the ship beyond the horizon. And yet, the survivors pressed on. Because what else was there? To turn back was impossible. To give up was death. And so they clung to the illusion, the stories of Batavia's riches, the vision of streets where their suffering would be repaid in gold. But when at last the ships arrived in the east, the vision collapsed into a far crueler reality. Batavia was no paradise. It was a furnace, where men were consumed as quickly as they arrived. The air was thick and heavy, buzzing with insects that carried death in every bite. The waters around the city reeked of rot and disease, swelling with mosquitoes that spread fever through the barracks like wildfire. Soldiers who had survived the voyage now found themselves trapped in a place where each breath carried risk. And then came war. Not the noble clashes they had imagined, not the clean victories sung in songs, but a grinding struggle in unfamiliar jungles, where enemies struck from shadows and every tree seemed to whisper threats. Muskets misfired in the damp air, blades hacked through flesh, and cannon blasts turned young recruits into scattered fragments of bone and blood. You are there, standing in the chaos of a skirmish on the edge of Batavia's defenses. Smoke fills your lungs. Screams mix with the crack of musket fire. The man beside you drops, his chest torn open, his body convulsing in the mud. You hear the sound of steel meeting flesh again and again, until the ground itself feels alive with violence. Some fought and fell quickly. Others staggered back wounded, limbs mangled, bodies burned, eyes wide with shock. These were the men carried from the battlefield, left bleeding into the dirt, their once golden dream reduced to groans of pain. They had imagined a return to Europe with wealth enough to lift their families from poverty. Instead, they now clutched at life itself, their futures narrowed to a single, terrible question: how long could they survive? And yet, even here, as their bodies broke, as disease hollowed them from within, there lingered the illusion of glory. Commanders told them they were serving empire, that their suffering was noble, that Batavia would remember their sacrifice. The men wanted to believe it. They had to believe it. Otherwise, all the agony was for nothing. But belief has its limits. Because the truth, as you are about to see, is that the VOC did not honor its wounded. It discarded them. For the empire, a soldier's worth ended the moment his body could no longer fight. And this is where the nightmare truly begins. Yet, for the wounded, the true nightmare began not on the battlefield, but afterward. If you've made it this far, you clearly want the truth. But are you one of those who listens to the darkest history, then refuses to support the one channel that dares to expose it? Tale of history needs your voice, don't lurk in silence. You march into the jungle, the heat pressing down on you like a smothering hand. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, salt carried from the coast, and the acrid sting of gunpowder already clinging to your throat. The palm trees loom like watchful sentinels, their shadows concealing enemies you cannot see. Every sound makes you tense. The chirp of insects, the rustle of leaves, the quick snap of a branch beneath your boots. Then it happens. The first musket cracks like thunder. The air splits, and a man beside you jerks violently, his chest exploding in a spray of red that spatters across your face. His body crumples into the undergrowth, twitching once, then falling still. Before you can even draw a breath, another shot tears through the ranks, followed by a storm of screams and shouts. The jungle erupts into chaos. You fire blindly into the trees, the smoke from your musket choking you as much as it blinds you. Then the enemies appear, silent shadows with blades flashing in the sun, striking with precision. Steel slices through flesh, muskets misfire in the damp, and cannon fire from the coast tears the ground apart in showers of earth and bone. You see a man's leg vanish in an instant, ripped away in a burst of shrapnel. He collapses, shrieking, his blood pooling so quickly it soaks the soil black. The ground becomes a slaughterhouse. The smell is unbearable, sweat, smoke, and the metallic tang of blood that coats your tongue with every breath. The cries of the dying echo off the palms, rising into a chorus of agony that will haunt you long after the guns fall silent. You stumble over bodies, friends, comrades, strangers, all of them reduced to twisted shapes in the mud. One clutches at his stomach, trying to hold his intestines inside as they spill between his fingers. Another reaches for you with half a face, his jaw shattered, teeth hanging loose in a grotesque grin. His eyes plead with you for mercy, but what can you do? You cannot save him. And still, the battle rages. Cannonballs slam into the earth, hurling men into the air like rag dolls. Muskets roar, their recoil jolting arms already weary from fear. Swords clash, the ring of steel mixing with guttural cries as men hack each other apart, blow after blow, until neither can stand. This is not glory. This is not the honor they promised you. This is dismemberment, disease, madness. When the fighting slows, the field is a grotesque landscape. Broken bodies lie scattered like discarded dolls, flies already buzzing over their wounds. The air reeks of powder and blood, a stench so strong you feel it clinging to your skin. Those still alive groan, cry out, beg for help that will never come. Because in Batavia, there is no salvation for the wounded. The surgeons arrive, but they are not healers. They are butchers, armed with saws and knives dulled by overuse. Men are laid out on tables still slick with the blood of the one who came before. No anesthesia. No clean bandages. Just a leather strap shoved between their teeth to muffle their screams. You watch as an arm is sawn through, the soldier thrashing and howling, his blood spraying the walls until he finally collapses into unconsciousness, or death. Some survive the cutting, but their wounds fester in the heat. Infection crawls through their bodies like wildfire. Flesh turns black, pus oozes, fevers burn so hot that men claw at their own skin in delirium. The lucky ones die quickly. The unlucky linger, trapped in beds of straw where rats gnaw at their toes while they still breathe. And through it all, the company does not care. To them, you are not a man, you are a tool, a number, a replaceable part in the great machine of empire. Once broken, you are discarded. You lie there, staring at the ceiling of some foul barracks, your body broken, your future stolen. You thought the battlefield was the worst that could happen. You thought the pain of musket fire, of blades and cannonballs, was the edge of human suffering. But you were wrong. Because pain was only the beginning. What awaited the injured was something far worse. You thought the battlefield was hell. But now you see, hell follows you back. Dragged from the mud, half-conscious, your body broken, you are thrown into the care of men who call themselves surgeons. But they are not healers. They are executioners with knives. Their workshop is no sanctuary, it is a slaughterhouse. You are laid on a rough wooden table still slick with another man's blood. Around you, the air is thick with the copper stink of iron and the sickly sweet rot of flesh already gone black. The groans of the wounded echo from every corner, a chorus of torment that never ends. A soldier thrashes on the bed beside you, his screams muffled only by the strip of leather clenched between his teeth. The surgeon saws through his leg, each stroke tearing through skin, muscle, and bone. Blood pours in waves. The man's eyes roll back, but the sawing continues until the limb falls away with a wet thud. Then it is your turn. They press you down with rough hands. You taste leather as it is shoved into your mouth. A heated iron is brought near, the glow of its edge flickering in the shadows. The smell of burning flesh fills the room before you even feel it. Then the pain comes, searing, blinding, a fire that consumes every thought. You thrash, you kick, but they hold you tighter, cauterizing your wound with merciless precision. The smell is worse than the pain, the stench of your own body turning to ash beneath their hands. And this is mercy. Others are not so lucky. Some are bled dry with leeches, their weakness mistaken for healing. Others are abandoned altogether, left to rot in crowded wards where disease spreads faster than whispers. You can see them, rows of men with fever-glazed eyes, their bodies twitching as flies swarm their sores. The air is suffocating with the stink of vomit, urine, and decay. The walls themselves seem to sweat sickness. Every cough, every moan, every shiver carries death to the man lying beside him. Here, survival is not healing, it is endurance of horror. You are not restored. You are merely kept alive long enough to serve as proof of the surgeon's work. And yet, the company does not care. To the officers, you are expendable. You are a ledger entry, a number on a page. If you can no longer hold a musket, if you can no longer march, then you are a burden. A waste. A body that consumes food better saved for the healthy. So they discard you. Some are put back to work too soon, their wounds barely stitched, their bones still broken. They are made to march until the wounds split open again, until infection spreads, until death finishes what battle began. Others are simply left behind. Left in filthy hospitals where rats nibble at their sores, where corpses lie unburied beside the still breathing. Left on the decks of ships where the healthy step over them like they are not men at all, but refuse to be cleared away. And yet, in your delirium, you hear the stories, the whispers of what happens to the ones who linger too long. You hear of men used for practice, their broken bodies cut open again and again as apprentices learn their trade. You hear of soldiers turned into warnings, left exposed so the healthy might see what failure looks like. And sometimes, when supplies run low, the weakest are given nothing. Not even water. Their suffering stretched, prolonged, until death becomes their only escape. You lie there, your body trembling, your mind teetering between pain and fever. You wonder if your turn will come, if you will be carved open, if you will be cast aside, if you will be left to rot unseen. And in that moment, you understand the truth. The battlefield may have broken your body. But here in the hands of your own commanders, you are broken as a man. You are not a soldier anymore. You are not even human. You are a thing. A tool too damaged to be useful. And if death by neglect wasn't enough, another fate awaited, the fate of being used. Pause and ask yourself. Why should tale of history be forced to compete with fluff channels, when we are the ones dragging forbidden truth out of ancient fire? If you won't subscribe, at least tell us in the comments why knowledge makes you so uncomfortable. You thought neglect was the worst fate a wounded soldier could endure. But then came the sea. The year is 1629. The Batavia, flagship of the Dutch East India Company, cuts through the waves, its belly full of soldiers, merchants, women, and wealth bound for the East. But greed, paranoia, and ambition festered in the shadows of the voyage. And when the ship struck a reef off the coast of Australia, shattering its hull against the jagged teeth of stone, the survivors were thrown into a nightmare far worse than the wreck itself. You hear it, the splintering of timbers, the roar of waves swallowing men whole, the panicked screams as bodies are dashed against rocks. In the chaos, you cling to debris, your wounds burning with salt water, your lungs choking on brine. Somehow, you wash ashore. You stagger onto a barren island, the sand scorching beneath you, the sun a blazing curse overhead. Around you, hundreds of others drag themselves to land, shivering, bleeding, desperate. At first, there is relief. You have survived. But quickly, relief curdles into despair. The islands are barren, no shelter, no food, almost no water. The sea stretches endless in every direction, mocking you with its cruel horizon. And among the survivors are men who see opportunity in desperation. Jeronimus Cornelisz. His name will be burned into memory like a brand. A merchant turned mutineer, he whispers promises of control, of survival, of power. His followers grow bolder each day, their eyes scanning the survivors not with pity, but with calculation. And soon, a grim truth takes hold, there are too many mouths, and not enough to feed them. You are wounded. You feel it in every step, every shallow breath. Your body is weak, your strength drained. And that makes you dangerous, because in this place, weakness marks you for death. The mutineers move swiftly. They begin with the injured, those too broken to fight back. You see them dragged from the sand where they lay gasping. Some are carried toward shallow graves already scraped into the earth. Others are marched to the water's edge, their bodies trembling, their voices hoarse with pleas. Water, they whisper. Mercy. But mercy does not come. Blades flash in the sunlight. Blood stains the shore. The wounded crawl, trying to drag themselves away, leaving trails in the sand like wounded animals. Some raise their hands in surrender, only to have them hacked down. Others are struck where they lie, their heads split open, their cries silenced in an instant. You feel it, the terror of helplessness. You know you cannot fight. You know you are next. You press your face into the burning sand, praying the mutineers will overlook you, praying they will find another before they find you. But you hear the laughter, the mocking voices, the shuffle of boots drawing near. Day after day, the killing continues. Men who once shared bread on the ship now raise knives against each other. Soldiers once sworn to protect the weak now join in the slaughter, their eyes hollow with hunger, their souls hollow with greed. Those too wounded to stand are given no chance. They are starved, their rations withheld until death comes slow and agonizing. Some drink seawater in desperation, their bellies swelling, their tongues cracking, their minds unraveling before the end. You see them, soldiers crawling across the sand on hands and knees, their lips blistered, their voices rasping. They beg for water. They beg for life. And in answer, they are struck down. Executed without mercy. Their bodies left where they fell, the sun baking them until the air itself reeks of decay. This is no longer survival. This is culling. Cornelisz and his followers justify it as necessity. Too many mouths. Too little food. But you know the truth, it is not survival that drives them. It is cruelty. It is the taste of power. The wounded are not simply left behind, they are hunted, slaughtered, erased. And yet, as you watch the bodies pile, as the cries fade into silence, you realize there is still a fate worse than this. Because some were not granted the mercy of death. Some endured even worse than death. You hear the moans of the broken. They lie scattered across the coral sand, half men, half corpses, soldiers who once marched proudly under the banner of the VOC, now reduced to husks of flesh trembling under the pitiless sun. Their wounds fester, their lips crack, their eyes glaze. And yet, they are not left alone to die. No. The mutineers find a use for them. For Jeronimus Cornelisz and his followers, weakness was opportunity. These maimed soldiers, too feeble to raise a musket, too slow to flee, became tools in a theater of control. Imagine it, men with stumps where legs had been hacked away, dragged into the sand by jeering hands, propped upright with mock ceremony, then paraded before the others. Their suffering was no accident, it was staged. Their agony became a lesson, this is what happens to the useless. Some were forced into experiments of cruelty. A jug of brackish water placed just beyond reach, as the healthy were ordered to watch them crawl, scraping torn knees against coral, their fingers stretching desperately toward salvation that would never come. Others were pressed into games of torment, commanded to fight one another for scraps of food, while their captors laughed at the grotesque spectacle. There was no prize, no mercy. Only humiliation. And then, the experiments grew darker. Cornelisz, drunk on power, tested loyalty through blood. Wounded men were told they could live, if they swore fealty. And then, as trembling voices swore oaths, their throats were slit anyway. Each killing was a message carved into the minds of the survivors: trust is meaningless, hope is poison. The wounded were sometimes used as pawns in battle itself. When rumors spread of survivors plotting resistance, Cornelisz ordered the broken soldiers dragged to the front of his defenses. They were forced to stand, trembling, as living shields, meet barriers against musket fire. Some collapsed before the first shot was fired, their frail bodies unable to bear even the weight of fear. Those who fell were not retrieved. They were left where they dropped, their corpses becoming barricades of flesh. But the cruelty did not stop at death. Others were ordered to labor beyond their broken limits. Men with mangled hands forced to haul stones. Men whose legs were bandaged in blood commanded to dig shallow wells in sun-hardened ground. Every task was punishment disguised as necessity. And when they failed, as they always did, they were beaten, mocked, sometimes drowned in the surf for amusement. You can almost hear their cries even now. Hoarse, cracked voices begging for mercy. And in those voices, something more chilling than fear, resignation. For these men had realized the truth, they were no longer soldiers, no longer brothers in arms. They were props in a grotesque ritual, their pain feeding the power of others. And still, some endured. Endured humiliation, endured starvation, endured the mockery of their captors. They clung to life with a desperate, irrational grip, as if mere breathing might spite the men who sought to erase them. But what was left to cling to? A day without water? A night of torment? Survival itself had become a twisted burden. Because here, on these cursed islands, survival was not salvation. Survival was spectacle. And those who lived too long became the stage upon which cruelty played its endless performance. So I ask you, what is the value of survival, when survival itself is torment? But even this torment was not the final chapter. For the islands would soon become drenched in even deeper horror, horror that swallowed not just the broken, but the strong as well. The nightmare had only begun. Others will click away right now, too disturbed, too fragile. But if you're still watching, you're exactly who Tale of History was made for. Prove it by subscribing, or explain in the comments why you'd rather stay a silent witness. You imagine the ship finally limping into Batavia's harbor, sails torn, hull scarred, its deck stained with the memory of mutiny. Survivors stumble ashore, their shadows stretching long in the tropical sun. They should have been welcomed as men who endured the unendurable. Instead, they were reduced to whispers. Damaged goods in a city already built on the bones of the forgotten. For those who survived the massacre and the experiments of cruelty, there was no honor, no pension, no redemption. The Dutch East India Company had no place for broken men. In the ledgers, they were not heroes, they were numbers, logged with the cold precision of profit and loss. One entry might read, 1 musket lost. 2 barrels of powder spoiled. 8 soldiers wounded, unfit for service. Nothing more. No names. No stories. Just loss, already priced and accounted for. You see them now, dragging themselves through Batavia's streets. Limbs gone. Eyes clouded. Skin crawling with infection. They lean on crutches carved from scrap wood, begging for alms in a city that did not want to remember them. Passers-by avert their eyes, pretending not to hear the rasping coughs, the pleas for bread, the whispers of, "I fought for you." In the eyes of the company, these men were no longer soldiers, they were burdens. Some found shelter in crumbling taverns, where the smell of gin masked the stench of rotting wounds. Others died in the gutters, their bodies carted off at dawn with the refuse of the city. A rare few were granted space in overcrowded hospitals, where the air reeked of pus and smoke, and where cries for water were drowned by the saw of another amputation. Survival, for them, was nothing more than a slow decay. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover the silent testimony these men left behind. Shallow graves hidden in the sand of the Abrolhos Islands. Skeletons with jagged bone edges where amputations had been done crudely, without healing. Skulls cracked not by battle, but by execution. Teeth worn down to nubs from malnutrition, ribs marked with lesions of starvation. The earth itself kept their story, even as the VOC tried to erase it. In Batavia, too, bones surfaced in forgotten corners, men dumped with no ceremony, their graves unmarked, their suffering unmourned. Their only epitaph was silence. Their pain, once deafening, became buried beneath centuries of dust and commerce. And still, the records remain, thin scraps of parchment where clerks reduced agony to neat rows of ink. In those archives, the wounded are invisible. Their screams do not echo through the pages. Their names do not appear beside the prophets of nutmeg and pepper. They were expendable. Replaceable. Forgotten. You cannot help but feel the cruelty of it, that men who endured cannon fire, mutiny, starvation, and torture were remembered not as martyrs, but as losses, erased as efficiently as spoiled cargo. Their deaths were not tragedies in the eyes of the company, they were simply the cost of empire. But listen closely. If you stand on the windswept islands where the Batavia survivors once clawed for life, you can almost hear them still. The rattle of breath. The scraping crawl of bodies across coral. The faint, unending plea for water. Their voices linger in the soil, in the bones unearthed centuries later, in the silence of their unmarked graves. And yet, History itself nearly buried those screams. The story of these men, their torment, their abandonment, their obliteration, was nearly lost to time, swallowed by the very empire that used them. But silence does not last forever. The earth remembers what ink tried to forget. And in those bones, in those graves, lies the truth of what survival really meant. The Dutch East India Company was not merely a merchant empire, it was a machine of forgetting. It fed on memory, reshaping the past into something profitable, burying what did not serve its purpose. And for the wounded of Batavia, silence was not an accident. It was policy. In the official accounts, you will not find their cries. The mutiny is described as treachery punished, order restored, commerce resumed. The shipwreck itself is treated as a logistical misfortune, a regrettable delay in the flow of nutmeg and cloves. But the voices of the maimed, the abandoned, the executed, those voices were cut away, amputated from history as cleanly as a surgeon saw through bone. The VOC knew the danger of stories. If word spread of how its wounded were discarded like spoiled meat, fewer men would enlist. If families in Amsterdam or Haarlem learned how their sons were treated once their bodies were broken, the steady supply of recruits would falter. And so the truth was buried under ledgers, hidden behind the shine of profit. You must imagine the weight of this silence. A soldier, shattered by musket fire, dragged across coral and left to starve, may have whispered his testimony to a companion before death claimed him. That companion might have survived, returned to Batavia, even staggered home across the long oceans. But when he spoke of the cruelty, who listened? Who dared record it? To accuse the company was to risk ruin. To speak against it was to vanish. And so, even survivors were forced into silence, living ghosts who carried the memory but could never release it. Centuries later, when archaeologists dug beneath the sand of the Abrolhos Islands, they found what the company tried to erase. Skeletons stacked together without care. Skulls fractured not by waves or storms, but by deliberate blows. Bones scarred by failed amputations, ribs marked by starvation. The ground remembered what the archives did not. The silence of paper was betrayed by the honesty of earth. But fragments remain elsewhere too. Letters, rare, fragile, smuggled home by sailors who dared hint at the horrors. Testimonies whispered at trials, written in ink trembling with fear. Yet these were scraps, always scraps. The VOC drowned them in its flood of reports, its endless lists of cargo, its calculations of profit. For every letter of suffering, there were 100 pages praising wealth and conquest. The silence was deliberate. History was not written by the wounded, it was written by the victors, the merchants, the men who never bled in the jungles of Java or starved on barren coral islands. The truth lay not in books, but in bones, buried and waiting. You cannot help but wonder, how many other silences exist? How many stories of suffering, erased because they threatened the power of empire? The Batavia is but one ghost among thousands, it screams one echo among countless others. The VOC perfected not only trade but also forgetting. And forgetting is its own form of violence. Even now, when you read of the Batavia, you are more likely to find tales of mutiny, of the cruelty of Cornelisz, of the company's eventual justice. But the wounded, the broken men abandoned in the sand, remain shadows, barely acknowledged, their pain swallowed by larger narratives of greed and punishment. Their suffering is inconvenient, and so it lingers on the margins. But the silence cannot hold forever. The graves have been unearthed. The records, once dismissed, are being reread with new eyes. The fragments of testimony are pieced together, and the bones whisper again of a truth that empire tried to strangle. The legacy of silence is not just about the past. It is about us, here and now, listening to the voices once denied. The question is, will we turn away, as the people of Batavia once did? Or will we finally face the horror that silence tried to bury? Because history's darkest secrets are not always in what is told. They live in what is left unsaid. And yet, even this silence was not the end. For the greatest horror of all lay not in what was erased, but in what survived. The story of the Batavia's wounded does not live in triumph, nor in glory. It survives only in silence, in shallow graves, in bones gnawed by starvation, in ledgers that reduced men to numbers. Their suffering exposes the darkest truth of empire, that soldiers were never seen as human. They were tools, sharpened, used, and discarded when broken. You were told the promise of honor. You were told of wealth, of conquest, of eternal legacy. But beneath the banners of empire, the reality was far more chilling. For the men who crawled through blood-soaked decks, who begged for water on the burning sand, survival was not a gift. It was torment. And in their screams we hear a truth that still echoes today: war does not remember its wounded. Power does not mourn the broken. Now ask yourself, were these men truly victims of war? Or were they victims of something darker still, the cold cruelty of human indifference? The Batavia story lingers not just as history, but as a mirror. A reminder that beneath every tale of conquest lies a silence built on suffering. And that silence is dangerous, because when the forgotten are erased, cruelty repeats itself, over and over again. Do not let their voices vanish into the dust. Do not let their graves remain unmarked in memory. Carry their story with you, for in remembering, we resist indifference. Because history's darkest lessons are not warnings for the past. They are warnings for us. This is Tale of History. If their screams still echo in your mind, let them echo further. Share this story, subscribe, and keep alive the truths empires tried to bury. For only then can we answer the question, is humanity doomed to repeat this cruelty, or can we finally learn to listen to the forgotten?